When Turkey downed a Russian jet on November 24th, the Russian media needed to come up with a response. How to cast the story. There were a number of ways to go. Historian and commentator Anne Applebaum offers us an overview of the options with her article in the Washington Post. That's what we'll look at here today on the Press Review. Applebaum writes, various interpretations could, in theory, be placed upon this event. Depending on one's point of view, it could be described as an act of self-defense on the part of Turkey, a NATO member, or an act of aggression. But to Russian President Vladimir Putin and to his clique in the Russian media, only one question matters. To which of his narratives should it belong? Applebaum offers an assessment of the Russian media as a whole. Its responses to events seem to follow a certain pattern. It is, apparently, rather predictable. Applebaum tells us nothing ever just happens. Every event is always part of a larger story, usually a conspiracy theory. Russia, or rather a plot to destroy or undermine Russia, always lies at the center. Elements of reality are included in the story, but distorted with virtual reality in order to suit the storyline. And nowhere was that approach more on show than in 2014, when Ukraine's pro-EU demonstrations, the Euromaidan, were in full force on the streets of Kiev. Applebaum elaborates. Famously, the Euromaidan demonstrations in Ukraine in 2014 were repeatedly interpreted by the Kremlin as a revival of Nazism, inspired and supported by NATO. Patriotic television entertainment depicted fantasy battles between Russian biker gangs and Ukrainian fascists bearing swastikas or NATO symbols. The propaganda continued even when elections brought centrists to power and excluded the tiny far-right parties in Ukraine from any serious influence, and even when NATO failed to come to the military defense of Ukraine. Applebaum says that in the end, Russian President Vladimir Putin has chosen to interpret the downing of the Russian plane as part of a terrorist plot against Russia. He's left out the option of casting it as NATO aggression. She says, given the alternatives, that's good news. It means that Russia is unlikely to respond to the Turks militarily and unlikely to drag NATO into broader conflict. It could also mean that Putin still hopes to be part of a larger coalition in Syria, or that he still wants a role in whatever Western diplomatic effort might eventually bring the war to an end. After all, he needs evidence for another one of his narratives, that he has brought back his country's superpower status and its international influence. But this is not the end of the saga. Things could yet change. After all, the Kremlin always keeps a close eye on public opinion and is more than willing to use the media to sway it one way or the other. Applebaum says, what if there are further Russian losses or another plane is shot down? Then the Kremlin will need an explanation for its failures and the narrative will have to change again. NATO might still prove an excellent villain. So, this story ends on something of a cliffhanger. Turkey's actions may just be the beginning of a new chapter in Middle East relations. We'll have to stay tuned to events in the region to see what the next episode will bring. That's all we have time for today. Join us again tomorrow for another press review. In Kiev, this is Ukraine Today.